Right, I guess we'll get started. Just a reminder, this is getting recorded. We are May 22nd. Nikhil, you're still taking notes? Also not.
So you want me to get my computer?
No, it's fine. All right. From what I remembered on the agenda, there was nothing specific in terms of reviews. There was a request, I think it was sometime over the weekend by Dan Wilson to discuss the status of sync controller. So I don't know if you want to start off with that, Jonathan.
Yeah, and then Mauro can add in more details. So right now, I have in flight a PR that converts the replica set controller to use the sync controller. There are, right now, it's still early enough phases and in discussion enough that I think it will potentially change in some respects, but it works. So that conversion work has been done. I expect that when that is done and submitted, doing the same thing for the deployment controller should be relatively straightforward. I believe so far the secret config map and daemon set controllers have been converted to use a sync controller. I don't think there's any expectation that all of the controllers will be converted over this cycle, especially the ones that are more complicated and have different logic. So I expect that the ingress and service controllers will continue to remain as they are through 1.7. And we have to look in more detail as to what work is necessary to make them into sync controllers. Because I personally have not looked at them enough to know how possible that is or what we need to do.
Yeah, I could help with that. This is fantastic news. Thank you very much for all the hard work that you and others have put into making more sane our current set of, I guess, whatever you call them, sinkers. Yeah, off the top of my head, and maybe you and I can sit down sometime and talk about it in more detail, but I think the service controller stuff is probably the most complex. And it's not that complex. I mean, basically what happens is when you create and delete services in the underlying clusters, you also need to trigger updates to DNS. And then in the opposite direction, when the status of services in the underlying clusters changes, you need to update the aggregated status of the federated service. But neither of those are super complicated. I guess the question is just where to hook them into the current sync logic. But yeah, it would be fantastic to get to a point where everything is using the same sync logic.
And I saw Shashi had a PR where he refactored the service controller so that we have a separate DNS controller now, which has all the DNS logic. So what's left in service controller should be relatively easier to move to sync controller.
Yeah, that's true. Still, I think it should be relatively easy now. We need to just update the federated service, which is not there currently in sync controller. Let's say, get the aggregated status and update the federated status. That's one thing. And another one is we should be watching on two objects like service and endpoint. So that's also probably not in the sync controller.
Why do we have to watch on pods? We actually got rid of services. Oh, services. But what else? It's watching on services and pods?
The endpoints.
Endpoints. Oh, endpoints. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Never mind.
Yeah, it's endpoints.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes more sense.
Yeah, when the endpoints become ready or not ready, then we have to update DNS and the status of the service.
Yeah, probably it should be relatively easy now. Yeah, I will give it a shot. Yeah.
Cool. You might want to hold off until some of the work for replica sets, or for instance, or for HPA has gone in, because they will be adding some more logic to the sync controller that should at least, if not necessarily be exactly what you need, should be more like what you need and give a way, like a pattern forward. Because right now the sync controller, as it exists, will only really work well for basic objects that don't have any complicated sync logic or complicated status reporting. But once replica sets are being synced, there will be one example of an object that has both a more complicated setup step and a more complicated updating step back to into the federated object.
Yeah, I agree. So that's why I was not taking it on right away. I was waiting for replica set.
Just out of interest, what is the code freeze date for 1.7? Does anyone know off the top of their heads?
June 1st.
Oh, okay. So what I was going to suggest is we try and consolidate our wins and focus on just getting everything in there. So we can tackle the stuff that is unlikely to be finished by the week.
Yes, I don't think we'll be able to get service controller in 1.7.
Mm-hmm.
How about jobs?
I think that's done, not synced with the sync controller, but I believe, I can check with John Hui, but I believe it's all.
Yeah, so yeah, this is Deepak. Yeah, so it's all done. Everything is ready to go. The sync controller is not there yet. So that's, he's planning to do that post 1.7.
Okay.
But Deepak, this is Irfan. I saw one or two failures on that PR, some test failures. So I think that needs to be updated. If you can inform Janhui,
Okay.
he should take it up on priority.
Okay,
Because
yeah.
that PR should be merged. I mean, if everything is green and all that stuff is done, then it should be merged.
Yeah.
How about the design? That's one thing we took up, was it last week?
Mm-hmm.
And we had discussions and suggestions, and I know there's an implementation that's in parallel, but right now I'm not sure the design document reflects entirely what we had discussed and what's in the code.
HPA.
So I had a chat with him. So it looks like he has resolved all the comments except for one comment. I mean, he had a question. He didn't understand that, actually, the discussion that went on. Everything else, he resolved it in the document.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Deepak, can you just make sure John Hui attends next week's meeting?
Yeah, yeah.
Again,
All right.
does it have all the tests as well?
Yes, yes.
Yep. I would want the HPA controller also to be added to this list. At least first phase implementation. I know there were some comments on the design, and we probably would need some updates. But I'm sort of ready with the first cut implementation of this thing. So I'll anyways raise a couple of PRs today. So hopefully it will not go through too many rounds of reviews in the next 8 days. So we should be able to merge that.
From what I recall, the design was, in my mind anyway, sort of good enough for alpha to get feedback from the community. Is that roughly the status of the implementation as well?
No, last week we had, the status of the implementation is in sync with the design that was reviewed last week.
Okay.
There were some additional things which probably were not clear in the design document, and I had to update. I haven't updated that, but I would surely update that within 2 days.
Okay, excellent.
So that is the status of the design. The status of implementation is quite in sync with what we discussed last time, except for one pointer in that, which is the other controllers also should have some option of switching off rebalancing or reconciling when HPA is on. So that I am not sure on what I should do the PR. Means because the replica set is not completely either moved to sync controller or it's not old. So if there is a decision that we are sure that replica sets controller, we are going to take it in, then I'll probably raise a PR on top of that. Otherwise, I'll raise the PR without that.
Sure. So from what I remember, all of the other things have rebalance equals false option on the object, or the annotations, as far as I recall.
No, Quinton, rebalance is equal to false is not sufficient in this case. My intention is to implement one more flag, which is an optional one in the annotations, which is updated not by the user, but updated by the controller, the HPA controller. Something like reconcile false or that kind of stuff. So
Okay.
the controllers means there has to be some communication between the two controllers. For example, HPA and the replica set controller. So if there is an HPA which exists in a particular cluster, for that cluster, not for that cluster, for that particular target object, this flag is set. So the replica set controller or the deployment controller, some portion of check is there that if this flag is there, they won't update the replicas. They leave it as they are.
I'll have a look at the design. Thanks.
Sure.
And this is a bit similar to the shadow replica set proposal that we had for deployments.
Yeah, but that exactly did not fit here.
Yeah, it's not exact because the shadow replica set was more for not syncing the replica sets in underlying cluster based on federation replica set. This is just within cluster. So it's not exactly the same, yes, but a bit similar.
Okay. I can maybe ping you sometime after this meeting just to tell you a little more detail on what I'm thinking of implementing. Is that okay, Nikhil?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, and with Jonathan and Maru, I have a request. Maybe after this meeting or some other time in next 2 or 3 hours, if it's suitable for you, I do want to have a chat with you guys.
Okay. Yeah, I should have time this morning.
Maru?
Yeah. I think, I mean, we can discuss it after this meeting.
Okay.
I think the challenge is just that the HPA use case is actually a subset of the replica set use case, which also includes like deployments
informal.
and jobs. So we're going to have a way of you kind of fitting inside of that. We can't really base work on top of that because you're only doing part of the work.
Yep.
But we'll discuss that further.
Sure.
Okay. So the other things we had on agenda was like cluster selector, which Dan was working on. I'm not sure if he's on the call, but he had sent an email last night. So I know his initial PR went in and he was asking about so he added his code to sync controller and he had a question regarding what should he do for other controllers. And I saw Shashi replied he wants it for service controller. So it seems fine to me to add this logic to service controller as well, because we know we won't move service controller to sync in 1.7.
Okay, yeah, I'll raise it today.
Yeah,
You mean 1.8?
I mean the cluster selector for services with the same controller. We can raise the PR today.
And my only stipulation is that I don't want to see copy and paste. If we're going to reuse it, I want something extracted and used in all places.
Agree.
Are we going to do it in all or like as needed places?
I think already it's a function, I believe, right? Send to cluster is a function. Just the caller will be repeated, I believe, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, we can deliberate on the PR. Okay,
Yeah.
that should be fine. Yeah.
Just a comment, Maru. In general, I agree with you. I'm just wondering if, in this case, let's say we had to cut and paste some code. it would be strictly temporary until all the other controllers had been moved to sync controller, and then it would all disappear again, right?
Well, I guess we'll see, but I mean, I'm not averse to having glue code copied, but I don't want logic that is otherwise well tested to be duplicated anywhere. And for that, I don't know.
I agree with you. I guess what I'm saying is it's a very temporary situation. If that does become necessary, given that the code should all only reside in the sync controller anyway.
If we can't figure out how to do this cleanly, then I think we have bigger problems, but I guess we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Okay, so I was saying we are doing it only for services controller, or it's fine to do for others, like the ingress and deployments.
Yeah, we can do that also. You want me to take it up? Then I can do that. No problem with me.
Yeah, you can probably sync with Dan and see.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just sync with him.
I think deployments are going to be moved to the sync controller, so I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because deployments and replica sets are very similar right now. They're similar enough that once replica sets goes in, deployments will be almost exactly the same.
Okay. So only thing remaining now is service ingress and namespace. I did it in another PR for leader election. I needed that. So I think we can take a look there. So only two remaining, service and ingress. So I can take it on.
Okay. Great. Let's see, agent. I see Corin is on call.
Hey guys, yeah, I'm here. Yeah, so the initial PR is up. Nikhil, whenever you have a chance to look at it, yeah, feedback is wanted. There are two things that are not included in there, I guess, right now. One is like end-to-end testing. So I don't know if we need to do that for this. It's just an admission controller. Yeah, if I could get some guidance on that, that would be great. And the other thing, I guess, is documentation. I don't know if we usually include that in the PR or not, but yeah, if I could get some guidance on those two things, that would be good. There are unit tests, obviously, for it.
So for documentation, there's a separate repository.
Okay.
Generally, we do it in a separate PR where you put the documentation once your PR is merged. For testing, yeah, it's good. We have unit tests, but we do want E2E tests as well.
Okay. And would you expect the E2E test to pull down the policy engine and deploy it, or how would you? What's the requirement there?
Yeah, so you can just use like a deployment definition which uses OPA image.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. And we've recently been working on adding integration tests as well. So maybe we can look at that here as well.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what your definition of integration test is, but yeah, maybe after you look at the tests in the PR, you can give me a pointer if I need to add more or not. I think it's fairly well covered right now. I mock out the policy engine in the admission control tests, so like all the failure cases are handled right now. But yeah, let me know.
Yeah. By integration tests, I mean like where we don't bring up a whole cluster and we don't depend on any cloud provider. Okay. Yeah. And you can look at our existing integration tests to see where we are now.
Sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, for auth, so we had a discussion. I had a discussion with Maru last time as well. So what we are trying to do right now is that the credentials that Federation uses, it assumes it has access to all namespaces, and there's no way to restrict it to some set of namespaces. And I'm trying to work on a PR to fix that so that admins can restrict Federation to just like, let's say 2 namespaces. And all the controllers should not assume that they have access to all namespaces. So yeah, I'll send a PR for that.
But Nikhil, is the plan not to have separate credentials per Federation user? Per customer?
No.
Yeah, You mean like the same thing we discussed with Federation uses users' credentials to send those requests, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so we weren't able to figure out how to how Federation would use those credentials, like impersonation or any other mechanism, because that way Federation gets more power than is necessary.
I think that path is just fraught with so many gotchas, and the fact that Cube doesn't really provide security mechanisms for anything above the namespace makes it really complicated. So I mean, I think, and what we're hearing from potential users of Federation, at least on the Red Hat side, is they primarily want to protect the Federation control plane. They want to have RBAC rules or whatever strictly enforced, and so long as that's provided, they're happy with restricted service accounts as a mechanism for providing access to the underlying clusters. But nobody's asking for, I do something in the Federation control plane, and then I'm using the exact same user credentials to move things over, because there's just too many moving pieces, and there's no way to tell who owns something, who created it, who updated it, without adding those on the Federation side. That's a heck of a lot of work to do something that Cube doesn't do itself. So maybe that'll happen in the future, but I don't really see it's viable in the near term. And I haven't heard anyone tell me that it should be.
Okay, yeah, sorry I've been out for a couple of weeks. That seems like a complete U-turn from the direction we were heading in before.
Pretty much, yeah.
I have some pretty big concerns about that, which I'd like to discuss before we go with that completely.
We're not precluding that, but I mean, if you're talking about needing, per user update tracking, or like per action update tracking, I haven't talked to anybody on the auth side who know more about this than anybody that say that's a good idea, we should do that. Quite the opposite. And I'm curious to hear, if you've talked to other people that said that it was feasible or reasonable for Federation to tackle on its own.
I guess I don't quite understand the argument here, so maybe we should talk about it separately. I mean, I think that what you're referring to is what I would consider to be somewhat of an implementation detail. The bigger concern is if you have RBAC on underlying clusters that grant or revoke permissions to do various things to objects. And my understanding of RBAC is that you do have more control than per namespace. You have per object type.
Yeah.
Let me just finish. And if that is potentially not being enforced because the actions are being performed as a different user, this gives a given user ability to do things they're explicitly not supposed to be able to do, or vice versa. So any solution that does not address that fundamental problem seems untenable to me.
The way that you work around that is you provide RBAC rules on a namespace basis. And
where?
You have to synchronize it. You have to do it at the Federation control plane, and at least initially, you're going to have to do it on the underlying clusters. So, user X can, they have access to create and update secrets in the Federation control plane and the underlying clusters. And it could be a global thing, or it could be on a namespace basis. But I mean, another thing that people are asking for is like, well, I want to be able to just propagate my RBAC rules too. And that would be kind of like a separate propagation mechanism, but still in Federation, so that you would actually move those RBAC rules to the clusters, or at least to the namespaces within the clusters that you were trying to federate to. But I don't think that's reasonable, like 1.7, maybe 1.8, but it clearly needs more investigation.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not proposing that we have to force stuff in the next week into 1.7. What I want to make sure is that we have agreement on where we need to get to, and figure out how much time and effort we need to get there. I mean, I'm comfortable with the idea that a feature that we could provide is to propagate RBAC rules from Federation down into the clusters for those users who wanted consistent RBAC rules in all of their clusters or in subsets of their clusters. But that's not the only use case. There's another use case where each cluster is administered independently by different people and have inconsistent RBAC permissions.
So we're talking about providing like namespace granular permissions to service accounts as a way of doing that, as opposed to per user, which really doesn't make any sense unless you're actually tracking who makes all the changes in Federation. And I'm just saying that doesn't seem to be feasible.
So I'd like to just jump in and say the original idea that I had where Federation uses those users' credentials to send those requests. Yeah, that I agree has like a lot of gotchas and stuff. But there was another idea which was discussed that maybe I can have like an admission controller which does the authorization check in the underlying cluster. So when Federation gets a request, it does the authorization check in Federation control plane, but then it also does the same authorization check in the underlying clusters as well. Like if you want to create a deployment in all clusters, it verifies that does this user has authorization to create that deployment in all the underlying clusters. When it's a request, it finally sends it as Federation service account, but it does an authorization check earlier. This can be an optional admission controller that admins can enable or disable.
Isn't there the potential though for the check to, there's an interval between when you make this admission controller check and when you actually perform propagation?
Yeah.
That seems like a hole that security people are not going to like. Or is it just that you're going to do an initial check, you're going to accept it, and then you're going to fail where, are you going to perform the check at propagation time too, or is it only at admission time?
It's only at admission time.
Yeah, I would definitely clear that with security people. To me, that seems a little bit problematic, but I'm obviously not an expert.
I would agree entirely. I don't.
But this is similar to the various other authorization checks we do as well. Like we do the authorization check when we are accepting the request, and once it's accepted, we ensure that it will work. Like similar to if you're creating a deployment, we'll check that you have authorization when we accepted the deployment, and then the deployment controller will create replica set or pods on your behalf. Maybe like later, even when your access has been revoked, since your request was accepted and at that time you had the access, the request will work.
Right, but I don't know, that seems a little bit different to me, because the initiation of like creating the deployment is one thing, and then as you say, it's like once it's accepted, the controller will treat it as if you're authorized. But I mean, in this case, you have the underlying cluster with authorization capabilities and you're just ignoring them or bypassing them.
So you did verify before accepting the request?
In the Federation control plane, sure. Anyway, I don't know. Like I said,
it sounds
maybe take it up with off.
Precisely analogous. It sounds like the other implementation that we have is just broken as well. And the question is, do we just build another broken one? I mean, clearly, if I don't have permission to create pods in a cluster, and that permission gets revoked, and the system is still creating pods for me, that seems just broken. And yes, we could build an equivalently broken one. I agree, Nikhil. It's probably consistent with what we have. I guess the question is what we have what we want, or what the permission people want, or is it essentially a bug? It sounds like a bug.
Yeah, another use case that was presented was, what if an employee submitted a workload like a deployment but they left the company later? Should that workload stop working, or should it continue to work? In the current system, maybe it's a feature or a bug, but that continues to work.
Yeah, I don't know the answer off the top of my head to that question. It seems like a difficult one to answer well. Yeah, I can totally see use cases where an employee leaves and they get all their permissions revoked, but you don't necessarily want the whole system to fall down on its face.
But this optional admission controller would, like you said, is in sync with our current implementation.
Yeah, that starts going into the territory, I think, where using one namespace per user becomes more attractive. It's with regards to revocation.
Don't quite understand what you're implying there, Christian, or if that was Christian.
Yeah, so one of the other discussions we had was, Nikhil, correct me here if I'm mistaken, was to, and this was attractive to the SIG auth folk, was to try to contain or at least associate users to particular namespaces and associate whatever RBAC rules through the federated clusters. That way, it's easier to revoke workloads because they're tied to particular namespaces.
Yeah, so this is similar to the first point that I wrote here, that the credentials that Federation gets are restricted to some subset of namespaces that you want to federate, let's say 2 namespaces across all your clusters. So you give Federation access to only those 2 namespaces, and then you can add or revoke such namespaces which Federation has access to. And then you limit Federation's access to only some subset of namespaces.
Yeah, I don't personally see how that solves the problem. I mean, you're still using the wrong credentials to do things on behalf of the user. You wouldn't have to do any of that stuff if you used the correct credentials. Yeah, I don't know.
Do you have Nikhil, do you have an updated design that sort of lays this all out on paper? Or does the original design lay this out in a way that like we can look through and just like people can look through and get a sense for what's going on?
Yeah, so there is a design. I can add a link to it here. And yeah, people can look at it. And there are already existing comments there from SIG Federation. Oh, sorry, SIG auth.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
So is that document currently up to date with respect to the conversations that you've had with them?
Yes.
Okay, maybe that's the best place for us to chime in if we agree or disagree or whatever. Yeah, if you stick a link in there, I'll go and have a look at it and add my comments there.
I'll do that for sure.
Thank you. Testing? Testing status, or is there anything else we wanted to talk about for 1.7?
I thought I saw Dan jump in just recently. Did we do A?
I did join, sorry. Had to join late today.
Oh, okay.
All right, yeah, we touched on your bullet.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I can catch up from you guys later if we have more to get through.
Okay.
Okay, testing, Madhu. Madhu, are you there?
I think you unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Hello?
Yes.
Am I audible now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, some problem with the mic, I guess. So what's the hot topic? End-to-end pre-submits was made required on Wednesday or Tuesday, I think. But it somehow started breaking on Friday. We made a mistake there. We moved our job, which was running on Jenkins, to Pro. And then when it broke, we figured out that we did not know how to use Pro to manually kickstart runs. So instead of blocking, we finally figured it out on Friday late evening. Jonathan and I were debugging until like 6:30 on Friday, but we figured that instead of blocking the whole PRQ queue for submit queue for Kubernetes, we would rather make the pre-submits not required for the weekend and then go figure out what was going on Monday. So that's the current status. I know we started build cop rotation this week, so in the future this is going to be a responsibility of the build cop. But given that this is the first week, and I know Nikhil, you are the build cop this week, I'm going to help you get this thing. Get this thing resolved. But that's the status.
Okay, so now we know what we need to do to make them blocking.
Well, not sure. We need to debug this. We don't know why we started seeing the failures on Friday, and the second problem was we did not know how to manually kickstart a run. So we know how to do the second thing, but we still don't know what caused the failures. It's an infrastructure failure, but I don't know what, like, we did not understand what caused those failures.
Okay. Apart from that, are our tests green?
Yeah, it's mostly green. Also, since we made it, I mean, at least before we made it required, we already caught at least one bug in the Kubernetes services. We caught it a little late, but we were still able to pinpoint a particular PR and say this is what caused the bug. And we talked to Zihong, who actually implemented the PR, and we fixed things. So all good.
Cool.
It's doing what it was intended to do.
Excellent. Just one suggestion, before we hand the responsibility for these blocking tests over to the build cop, I would suggest that we at least, verify that the infrastructure part of it works correctly, that the people who implemented it do that, and then hand it over, let's say after 2 weeks or something, to the build cop. And in the interim, as soon as you've diagnosed it to, there's a PR that's buggy or whatever that's causing things to fail, you hand that straight over to the build cop. But I don't think the build cop should be responsible for debugging the basic infrastructure like what you're describing now, until it's stable.
There are two things here. Build cops are basically us, people who at least I'm one of, like, this build cop we are talking about is the Federation build cop rotation. So people who work on Federation are the people who are on this build cop rotation. So technically it's the same people, at least I'm on the rotation. The other thing is I agree with you that we need to verify this, but there is no way we are going to verify all the scenarios, and unexpected things are going to happen. For example, the way it happened this week. So I think the right thing to do here is to document what to do when things break, or where to go look, what to debug, which is what I intend to do.
Yes, again, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I repeat what I say is I think you personally, or whoever the people are that have put this in place, should be responsible for getting it stable before it gets handed over to the build cop on call, which is this week Nikhil. I mean, in theory, the whole group is the same group of people, but they're actually different people. So what I'm making the distinction between here is Nikhil having to fix this as opposed to you having to fix this.
I mean, I agree with you, and I'm still going to repeat that it's quite impossible to verify all possible failure scenarios because many of them are unexpected.
No, I understand, but as I said, my suggestion was let's leave it running for 2 weeks.
We already did that, and Murphy's Law hit us back.
Oh, I thought you said you only switched it on Tuesday and it broke on Wednesday.
Oh, no. We made it required on Tuesday, but we had it running on all the PRs for, I don't know, 4 weeks now.
Oh, okay, so this was just bad luck. Okay, sorry, I'm missing.
Yeah.
We had a pretty good consistency. We were as consistent as 99% pass rate, and Murphy's Law.
Yeah.
So this switch to the different, you said it was previously running on Jenkins, and then you moved it to this other thing, the name of which I've forgotten. And my understanding was that that's what broke things, or did I misunderstand?
They are independent. Something caused infrastructure failure, but we had moved this thing from Jenkins to Pro. So we did not know how to roll things back or how to manually kickstart new runs. Okay. So there are two independent things.
When did we move it to Pro?
Shashi can say this. Friday, I guess, Shashi?
Yeah, I think probably Thursday or Friday, yeah.
Okay.
There was also, we ran into an issue with quota with the machines in the account because of the way that the clusters were being provisioned, or the machines were being provisioned by Prow versus the Jenkins bot previously, which was not the root issue necessarily, but was causing problems on Friday. So it looks like there was some bit of the issues we were having that was related to the move to Prow specifically, right, Madhu?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just debugging that half an hour back, and I found like the user we use is kind of different in Jenkins and Pro. So I made a one PR to change it back to the user to Jenkins.
Let's discuss about that. That might not be necessary, but let's discuss about that offline, as in outside this meeting.
Sure.
One quick question about end-to-end tests. Does anybody know what the status of non-GCE end-to-end tests at the moment? We spoke about running AWS and something else, maybe Microsoft Azure, I can't remember. Are those running yet?
So hi everybody, it's Colin. So the AWS one is up in a PR right now. We've just been working through review for the last couple of weeks, but I do hope we can get that merged before 1.7. The results last time I checked looked okay. We had probably 40 passes and 8 failures for the Federation focus. So there is a little bit of work to do to get that entire grid green as well.
Cool, thank you.
Who is reviewing this PR?
Madhu and Eric, I believe. Eric Fejda,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. It'd be great if we can make it, if we can get that PR merged in 1.7.
I mean, that's independent of the release cycle. Everything is in test infra, so you don't have to worry about the release cycles there.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and apart from AWS, other thing we discussed was to add GKE tests. But yeah, I don't think anyone is working on them. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, we should definitely put that near the top of our list for 1.8 if we're not going to get into 1.7, because lots and lots of users are using Federation on GKE, and we don't even know if it works there. I mean, we do know from manual tests, but as soon as it breaks, we don't know. And that's, I would say, the majority use case for Federation is GKE.
So this is my first time at the SIG, and I'm sort of acting as the liaison right now between Azure Container Service and the SIG. So if there's something I can do to help push that forward, anybody want to let me know what that might be? That would be super helpful. And I'm on the Kubernetes Slack as J. Dumars.
That is a fantastic offer. Thank you. Off the top of my head, you could take a look at the GCE stroke GKE end-to-end test for Federation and start figuring out what you would need to do to get the equivalent Azure tests running.
I will also say that in the PR for the AWS Federation EDE test, I did a little bit of work hooking KubeFed directly up with kubetest, which makes parallelizing bring up a lot easier, among other things. So you might just want to take a look at that before you get started on Azure.
Yeah, Colin, maybe you can CC him on your PR.
Okay, yeah, I'll look up the GitHub name.
And my GitHub ID is J. Dumars as well. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem.
We appreciate it more than you, I can promise you. Just out of curiosity, what is the current status of the Azure end-to-end tests for normal Kubernetes as opposed to federated Kubernetes?
I don't have a full status, but I can definitely find out and report back to the SIG next time we meet.
Cool. Yeah, it might be sensible to do that first, i.e. make sure we have a stable set of end-to-end tests for Kubernetes running on Azure before trying to get them federated. Just at least you have a stable base.
Yeah, that's very wise. I've had that question myself. I'm new to the org because I was with Deus and we got acquired by Microsoft. So we're still finding our way through the organization, which so far is amazing. Microsoft is really sincerely committed to open source, which is kind of blowing my mind in a really good way. So so that's really good news for the Kubernetes community as well.
Cool. Yeah, let's try and put the Azure federated tests on the 1.8 roadmap. And if you're volunteering to try and get that done in the next few months, that'd be fantastic.
I am indeed.
Cool.
Are there any open PRs that someone wants to point out or bring up?
So just this Deepak, Irfan, I thought the stateful set thing, I thought we were going to do a review today too. Irfan?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, it seems difficult. I mean, because all these points were there, and there's another 8-10 days for the code freeze. So I think we can do the review now. Also, I in fact was also thinking that we'll do that, but because other points were being discussed, I let it go. We can do it next week if there is no other more important point for 1.7.
I mean, my only concern is there's not enough time left then for the code phrase then.
Yeah, that's anyways quite difficult for it to go in 1.7.
So
Are you saying stateful sets, federated stateful sets implementation is unlikely to make it into 1.7?
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
And what are the main blockers there? Is it just that the implementation is not finished yet, or is it that
the implementation is not finished yet.
Okay,
that's the main thing.
Now I was just sort of wondering
if we sort of did the online review of designs over here. So stateful sets was also supposed to be reviewed once to clear out the implementation, which hasn't happened yet in this SIG, the online review of the SIG.
Okay, yeah, we should try and avoid that if we can. Yeah, I mean, that was a pretty headline item for 1.7. It would really be sad if we miss it because of bureaucratic process as opposed to necessity. Is there any way we can rescue it by reprioritizing? I mean, for example, we could potentially hold the review today or tomorrow. I reviewed it quite a while back, and I thought we resolved all the hard problems. And how, assuming that you got to go ahead today to go ahead with the design as it stands today, how much work is required to finish the implementation, at least to a point where the implementation could be merged? It may still have bugs or be missing a test or whatever, but how far away is that?
See, implementation wise, I can put it up in say a week's time, but that is another controller which we have to decide if it goes on top of sync controller, then we need some adapter mechanism, because
so we could put it into the bucket of all the other stuff that doesn't use sync controllers as a first step, right?
Yeah, in that case, I can. Sure.
I was going to say, so Quentin, you missed the last 2 meetings, but we covered 4 design reviews over the last 2 meetings. That's worked reasonably well, where, the Friday, which would be the 2 days before, 3 days in this case, before presenting the review, people can read up and be ready for the ensuing discussion. Irfan has presented, Jian Hui, Nikhil, and Eric Fada was also here from the testing group. I think that model reflects where we want to be in terms of having everybody on the SIG be on the same page. I would propose that stateful sets get the same treatment.
Oh, I don't disagree. Don't get me wrong. I think that process is great, and I think it works well. What I'm trying to figure out is whether there is reason for bending that, like expediting the review in order that we can get it into 1.7, because it is such an important feature in 1.7.
Sorry, you can finish.
So that was my only question, and I'm not trying to railroad things here at all. I'm just trying to figure out whether we should give up getting it into 1.7 or whether we should figure out whether we can get it into 1.7. Because clearly, if we only review it next week, we're not going to get into 1.7.
Well, it sounded like even if it were like right now, the PR would be out for review in a week, which is the 29th of May, which leaves, no, the 30th of May, because the 29th is Memorial Day. Next Monday is a U.S. holiday. So that leaves maybe like 2 days before they code freeze to actually review and merge the PR, because the code freeze is June 1st, right? Is it June 1st?
Right.
So that seems like a very short time frame. If the PR were out today, it would seem possible. But if the PR is out in a week, that seems like a very, very short window to get it in before the code freeze.
Yeah, there is an exception process whereby one can apply for an extension for that code freeze. Particularly, I believe the code freeze mostly applies if the code is there and under review, then it is inside the deadline, as I recall. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think you need an exception unless things have gotten an LGTM and the only pending thing is to get it merged.
So presumably, and again, I don't want to, force a square peg into a round hole here, but I'm just trying to figure out what options we have before we give up and say we can't do it.
I think the best option for getting this in would be somehow reconciling with Jonathan's work and building on the sync controller, because then most of the code is already tested.
Mm-hmm.
If you're talking about doing a fresh controller and getting it like in good shape by code freeze, that seems like a tall order to me.
So Irfan, have you not started implementing the controller yet? I thought I saw that you had several weeks ago.
I have, yeah, I have done some basic implementation of the same, where the stateful sets could be created in underlying clusters, that kind of stuff. But there are additional things like we have to additionally create services as per the current design.
Yes.
We have to additionally create services mapping those stateful sets. And the more important and complex portion is the DNS records, which
Yes.
according to me is a time-consuming job.
Okay.
It is not done.
Okay. And as far as I understand, none of that would really fit very well into the current sync controller.
Yes, so actually last 2 weeks I have been trying to get a common ground on rebasing the complex controllers on the sync controller. And because it was not reaching anywhere, I did not proceed with that other work.
Yeah.
I have been trying to proceed the HPA controller somehow on top of sync controller.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I mean, what is the general consensus here that my perception is, and I've spoken to several customers and other interested parties who are super excited about stateful sets being federated. So my impression is that it's pretty important. But is the consensus here that we want to just shelve it until 1.8?
Yeah, a lot of customers have been asking for it, but at least what I've been thinking in my mind is like there's a lot of work to do for stateless workloads as well, just to ensure they work. And yes, we do want to support stateful as well. But yeah, first make sure at least stateless works, and then while we review the design and implement stateful as well, yeah, in due course.
So can we at least schedule the design review before this 1.7? In that online thing that we have been doing. I was actually expecting that we'll do it today, but it seemed like there were more important things to discuss for 1.7 itself.
Yeah, so we can do it next week. And yeah, Jonathan just pointed out that next week is a holiday. I don't mind doing it on Tuesday, if it works for everyone else.
Okay.
Yeah, I seem
Works for me.
I seem to remember that we decided we were going to try and move this meeting off Mondays because essentially all of the US public holidays are on Mondays.
I think we keep bringing that up every time there's a holiday.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is a fact. The vast majority of US holidays are on Mondays by design. Does anyone object to that idea, or did we just not do it?
Yeah.
I don't mind the Mondays, to be honest. So I just, for example, next one is scheduled for Tuesdays in everybody's calendar at 9 a.m.
Are you saying every time that we miss the Monday due to a public holiday, we reschedule to Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay. I was just trying to minimize the amount of rescheduling because that then clashes with other things and people's calendars have other things on Tuesdays.
Personally, the 9 a.m. bugs me more than any day of the week, but
Yeah. If we can move it to 9:30 or 10 a.m. on Tuesday, I'll be very happy.
Yeah, then we have the problem with the guys in India who that's very late for them, I seem to recall.
For now, 9:30 should be okay, because that daylight saving is off.
Oh yeah.
So, I mean, we can conclude now itself rather than this going again into the mailing list and then not changing.
Yeah. So Tuesday night, changing it to Tuesday 9:30 every week sounds good to me.
Does anybody have objections to that?
Not off the top of my head. Let me have a quick look.
I have, Google internally has a conflicting meeting at 9 o'clock next week. So, but not in general any issues, I guess.
SIG testing appears to have their meetings on Tuesdays at 9:30 to 10:30. So it would just mean that none of us could attend that. But that's probably not the end of the world.
Okay, 9:30
On Tuesdays?
on Tuesdays.
Okay, so but for next week, yeah, Madhu brought an important point. We do have a meeting next week at 9 to 10. So next week we won't be able to do 9:30.
Should we make next week an exception and do 10? Is that too late?
We can do that. No, we can do that. I can do that.
Just as a one-off exception for this internal meeting that Google has.
Yes, I can do that. Hopefully Shashi also is okay with that.
Yeah, no problem for me.
Thank you, guys. Okay, is there anything, we're at time, is there anything else anybody wanted to discuss? Or should we wrap it up?
Yep.
Going once? Going twice? Gone. All right. Have a good week, everyone.
Ciao.
Thank you.